This will change your Christian life forever, a truth few talk about. There are moments in life when something shifts so deeply within you that you can never return to who you once were. It is not always loud, it is not always dramatic. Sometimes it happens in silence, in the stillness of your thoughts, in the quiet realization that the way you have been living your Christian life is not the fullness of what God intended. You have prayed, you have gone to church, you have tried to do what is right, but deep inside, something has always felt incomplete, like there is a deeper layer of truth that no one is really talking about. And what if that missing piece is not something new, but something that has been there all along, hidden in plain sight within Scripture, waiting for you to truly understand it? What if the struggle you face is not just about sin, discipline, or trying harder, but about a war happening within you that most believers never fully recognize? Because the truth is this: many Christians are trying to live a spiritual life while still being controlled by something they don't fully understand. And until you see it clearly, you will continue to fight battles that feel impossible to win. This is the truth few talk about, and once you see it, your entire Christian life will change forever. There is a war inside you, not a metaphorical idea, not a poetic concept. A real, ongoing, relentless war. The Apostle Paul described it in a way that is both unsettling and deeply honest. He said that the good he wants to do, he does not do, and the evil he does not want to do, that is what he keeps on doing. This is not weakness. This is not failure. This is the human condition under spiritual tension. And most Christians misunderstand this completely. They think that if they struggle, it means they are not spiritual enough. They think that if they feel temptation, they must be failing God. But what if the struggle itself is evidence of something deeper happening? What if the tension you feel is not a sign that you are far from God, but a sign that something within you is waking up? Because there are two forces at work within every believer: the flesh and the spirit. And these two are not just different, they are in direct opposition. The flesh is not simply your physical body. It is your old nature, your impulses, your desires that are rooted in self, in control, in comfort, in pride, in fear. It is the part of you that resists surrender. The Spirit, on the other hand, is the life of God within you, calling you higher, drawing you toward truth, toward holiness, toward a life that reflects something beyond this world. And these two are constantly at war. But here is the truth that few talk about. You cannot win this war by trying harder. You cannot overcome the flesh by sheer willpower. You cannot become spiritual by effort alone. And this is where so many Christians become exhausted. They try to discipline themselves into transformation. They try to control every thought, every action, every desire. And when they fail, they feel guilt, shame, and distance from God. But the problem is not their lack of effort. The problem is their misunderstanding of the battle itself, because the Christian life was never meant to be lived by your strength. It was meant to be lived by surrender. And this is where everything begins to change, when you realize that your role is not to overpower the flesh, but to stop feeding it, not to fight harder, but to walk differently, because whatever you feed will grow, and whatever you starve will weaken. This is not just a spiritual principle. It is a reality that shapes your daily life in ways you may not even notice. Every thought you entertain, every habit you repeat, every environment you place yourself in is either strengthening your flesh or strengthening your spirit. And most people are unknowingly feeding the very thing they are trying to overcome. They consume things that stir up pride, comparison, lust, anger, fear, and then they wonder why they feel distant from God. They fill their minds with noise, distraction, and superficial content, and then they struggle to hear His voice. They say they want a deeper relationship with God, but their daily life is not aligned with that desire. And this is not about condemnation. This is about awareness. because once you see this clearly, you begin to understand that transformation is not about dramatic moments. It is about consistent direction. It is about what you choose, moment by moment, day by day. It is about what you allow into your mind, your heart, your spirit. And this is where the real shift happens, when you stop asking, why am I struggling so much? And start asking, what am I feeding? Everything changes. Because the war within you is not won in one big decision. It is won in 1,000 small ones. It is won when you choose to turn away from what weakens your spirit and turn toward what strengthens it. It is won when you choose silence over noise, truth over lies, discipline over impulse, surrender over control. And at first it feels difficult, it feels unnatural, because your flesh resists it. It pushes back. It tries to pull you into old patterns, old habits, old ways of thinking. But the more you choose the Spirit, the stronger it becomes within you. And slowly, something begins to shift. The things that once controlled you begin to lose their power. The desires that once felt overwhelming begin to fade. The noise that once filled your mind begins to quiet. And in that quiet, you begin to hear something you may have never truly heard before, the voice of God, not as a distant idea, but as a real, guiding presence within you. And this is where your Christian life changes forever. Not because everything becomes easy, not because you never struggle again, but because you finally understand the nature of the battle and how to walk in a way that leads to victory. You stop living reactively, constantly trying to fix yourself after you fall, and you start living intentionally, aligning your life in a way that strengthens your spirit before the battle even begins. And this is the truth few talk about. The Christian life is not about trying to be better, it is about becoming different. It is about a transformation that happens from the inside out, not through force, but through surrender. Not through pressure, but through presence. And once you begin to live this way, you realize that everything you thought Christianity was only the surface. There is something deeper, something real, something powerful, and it has been there all along, waiting for you to see it. There is a moment in every believer's journey when the illusion begins to crack. It does not happen all at once. It is subtle, almost uncomfortable, like waking up from a long dream and realizing that what you thought was real was only partial truth. You begin to see that much of what you called Christian living was actually built on routines, expectations, and external behaviors rather than a deep internal transformation. You start to question things, not in rebellion, but in hunger. Why do I still feel distant sometimes, even when I do all the right things? Why does my heart still struggle with the same patterns even after years of faith? Why does it feel like there is more, but I can't fully grasp it? And this is where most people either turn back to comfort or step forward into truth. Because what you are beginning to sense is something that few are willing to confront. It is possible to follow God outwardly while remaining unchanged inwardly. This is the silent danger that exists in many Christian lives, not open rebellion, not obvious sin, but a subtle form of spiritual stagnation disguised as faithfulness. You attend, you listen, you participate, but deep within, the same fears, the same insecurities, the same patterns remain untouched. And over time, this creates a quiet frustration, a sense that something is missing, even if you cannot explain what it is. But here is the truth that changes everything. God is not interested in your performance, He is after your transformation. And transformation does not happen on the surface. It happens in the hidden places. It happens in the parts of you that no one else sees. Your thoughts, your motives, your inner conversations, the things you run to when no one is watching. The truth is, you can learn the language of faith without living the reality of it. You can speak about trust while living in fear. You can talk about surrender while holding tightly to control. You can preach about love while carrying resentment in your heart. And this is not hypocrisy in the way people often think. It is misalignment. It is the result of trying to build a spiritual life without addressing the inner foundation. And Jesus addressed this directly, often in ways that made people uncomfortable. He spoke to those who appeared righteous on the outside, but were disconnected on the inside, not to condemn them, but to reveal that true life with God cannot be sustained through appearances. It must come from within. And this is where many believers struggle, because inner transformation is not something you can fake. It cannot be rushed. It cannot be performed. It requires honesty. It requires stillness. It requires you to face parts of yourself that you may have been avoiding for years. The thoughts you don't want to admit, the wounds you haven't healed, the fears that still shape your decisions, the attachments that quietly pull you away from God. And this is where the real battle intensifies. Because your flesh does not only manifest in obvious ways, it hides in subtle ones. It hides in your need for approval. It hides in your desire to be seen as good, as spiritual, as worthy. It hides in comparison, in pride, in insecurity. It hides in the constant need to prove something, to others, to yourself, even to God. And the more you try to build your identity on these things, the more unstable your spiritual life becomes, because anything built on performance will eventually collapse under pressure. This is why some believers feel strong when everything is going well, but fall apart when life becomes difficult, because their faith was built on circumstances, not on transformation. And this is where the shift must happen. You must move from external faith to internal reality, from doing to becoming, from trying to impress God to learning how to walk with Him. And this is where many people misunderstand the concept of surrender. They think surrender means giving up control in a dramatic moment, a one-time decision where everything changes instantly. But true surrender is much deeper than that. It is not a moment, it is a lifestyle. It is the daily choice to let go of your need to control outcomes, to manage perceptions, to protect your own image. It is the willingness to be real before God, even when that reality is messy, broken, or uncertain. And this is where true intimacy begins, because God does not meet you in your performance, He meets you in your honesty. When you stop trying to appear strong and allow yourself to be seen as you truly are, something shifts, the pressure lifts, the striving fades, and in its place there is a quiet, steady presence, not distant, not abstract, but real. And this is what many believers have been missing, not more knowledge, not more effort, but more awareness of God's presence within them. Because the truth is, God is not far from you, waiting for you to reach a certain level before He comes closer. He is already near, already present, already working within you in ways you may not even recognize. But if your life is filled with noise, distraction, and constant activity, you will miss it. You will continue searching for something that is already there, and this is why stillness becomes so important. Not as a ritual, but as a necessity, because it is in stillness that you begin to see clearly. It is in stillness that the layers begin to peel away. It is in stillness that you become aware of what is truly happening within you. And at first, this can be uncomfortable, because when the noise fades, you are left with yourself, with your thoughts, with your emotions, with the parts of you that have been hidden beneath busyness and distraction. But if you stay there, if you resist the urge to escape, something powerful begins to happen. You begin to see patterns. You begin to recognize the ways your mind has been shaped, the habits that have been controlling you, the beliefs that have been limiting you. And once you see them, you can no longer ignore them. And this is where transformation begins. Not when you try to change everything at once, but when you become aware of what needs to change. Because awareness is the doorway to freedom. And most people remain stuck not because change is impossible, but because they have never truly seen what is keeping them bound. They continue to live on autopilot, repeating the same patterns, thinking the same thoughts, making the same choices, while expecting different results. But once you begin to live with awareness, everything changes. You start to notice when your thoughts drift toward fear. You start to recognize when your actions are driven by insecurity. You start to see when your decisions are rooted in the flesh rather than the spirit. And in that moment of awareness, you have a choice, not a forced, pressured decision, but a quiet, intentional shift, to pause, to realign, to choose differently. And this is how transformation happens, not in dramatic leaps, but in consistent, intentional adjustments. It is the daily practice of returning to truth, of bringing your mind back into alignment, of choosing the spirit over the flesh again and again, until it becomes your natural way of living. And over time, something remarkable begins to unfold. The things that once controlled you begin to lose their grip. The patterns that once defined you begin to break. The inner tension that once consumed you begins to settle, and in its place there is a new kind of stability, not based on circumstances, not dependent on feelings, but rooted in something deeper, something unshakable. And this is where your Christian life truly begins to change, not because you have become perfect, but because you have become aware. Not because you have eliminated every struggle, but because you now understand how to walk through it. And this is the truth few talk about. The greatest shift in your spiritual life does not come from doing more. It comes from seeing clearly. Because once you see, you cannot unsee. And once you understand, you cannot return to the old way of living. And from that point forward, everything becomes different. There comes a point in your journey where understanding is no longer enough. You begin to see the truth. You recognize the patterns. You become aware of the war within you, the tension between the flesh and the spirit, the subtle ways you have been living on the surface while something deeper calls you forward. But awareness alone does not transform you. It reveals, but it does not change. And this is where many believers get stuck. They see clearly, but they do not move differently. They understand deeply, but they do not live differently. And slowly, a dangerous gap begins to form, the gap between what you know and how you live. This gap is not just uncomfortable, it is exhausting, because now you can no longer pretend you don't see it. You can no longer ignore the quiet conviction in your spirit. You can no longer blame ignorance for your patterns. You know what pulls you away. You know what weakens you. You know what distances your heart from God, and yet you still find yourself returning to it. And this is where frustration begins to grow. Not because you lack desire, but because you lack alignment. Because transformation is not driven by desire alone. It is driven by direction. And this is the truth few talk about. What you repeatedly do will shape who you become far more than what you intend to do. Intentions feel powerful, but habits are what actually form your life. And if your daily rhythms are not aligned with your spiritual direction, you will continue to feel stuck no matter how strong your intentions are. You may want to grow, but if your environment, your routines, your mental patterns remain the same, your life will continue to reflect those patterns. And this is where many people misunderstand spiritual growth. They think it happens primarily through moments, through powerful experiences, emotional breakthroughs, or sudden clarity. And while those moments can be meaningful, they are not what sustain transformation. What sustains transformation is structure. It is the invisible framework of your daily life, the small repeated choices that either move you closer to God or slowly pull you away. And most people underestimate this. They are waiting for a breakthrough while ignoring the fact that their daily habits are quietly shaping their future. Because every day you are becoming something. You are not static. You are not neutral. You are either moving toward the spirit or drifting toward the flesh, and the direction of that movement is determined not by what you feel in a moment, but by what you consistently choose over time. This is why some people feel close to God during certain moments but distant in their daily life, because their spiritual life is built on occasional experiences rather than consistent alignment. And this creates instability, a cycle of highs and lows, moments of clarity followed by periods of confusion, times of passion followed by seasons of dryness. But what if your life was not meant to be a cycle, but a steady progression? What if instead of constantly starting over, you could begin to build something stable, something consistent, something that does not collapse every time you feel weak or distracted? This is where discipline enters the picture, but not in the way most people think. Because when people hear the word discipline, they often think of restriction, pressure, or force. They imagine a rigid life where everything feels controlled and heavy. But true discipline is not about punishment. It is about alignment. It is about creating a life that supports who you are becoming. It is about removing friction from what is right and adding friction to what pulls you away. It is about designing your environment, your habits, your daily rhythm in a way that makes it easier to walk in the spirit and harder to fall back into the flesh. And this is where everything begins to shift in a practical way. Because instead of constantly fighting yourself, you begin to structure your life in a way that supports your growth. You become intentional about what you consume, what you watch, what you listen to, what you allow into your mind. You become aware of how your environment influences your thoughts, your emotions, your decisions. You begin to remove the things that consistently pull you away and replace them with things that strengthen your spirit. And this is not about becoming extreme. It is about becoming aware of influence. Because everything influences you. Every conversation, every piece of content, every habit shapes your inner world in ways you may not immediately notice. And if you are not intentional, you will be shaped by whatever surrounds you. This is why some people struggle to grow, even though they desire it deeply, because they are trying to move forward while constantly surrounding themselves with things that pull them backward. They are trying to walk in the spirit while feeding the flesh daily through what they consume, what they focus on, what they prioritize. And over time, this creates internal conflict, a divided life, a constant tension between two directions. But when you begin to align your environment with your direction, something powerful happens. The struggle does not disappear, but it becomes clearer, simpler, more manageable, because now your daily life is reinforcing your spiritual intention rather than working against it. And this is where consistency begins to take root. Not forced consistency, but natural consistency that flows from alignment. And slowly, your identity begins to shift. You are no longer someone who is constantly trying to change. You are becoming someone who is living differently. And this is one of the most important shifts you will ever experience. Because real transformation is not about what you do occasionally, it is about who you become consistently. And once your identity begins to change, your actions follow naturally. You no longer have to force yourself to do what is right. It becomes part of who you are. You no longer feel like you are constantly fighting yourself because your inner world is becoming aligned with your direction. And this does not happen overnight. It is a process, a gradual unfolding, a series of small, intentional decisions that compound over time. And this is where patience becomes essential. Because many people give up too early. They expect immediate results, immediate change, immediate clarity, and when they do not see it, they assume something is wrong. But transformation is not instant. It is progressive. It is built over time through consistency, awareness, and alignment. And the ones who experience real change are not the ones who move the fastest, but the ones who remain consistent the longest. The ones who keep choosing the Spirit, even when it feels small, even when it feels unnoticed, even when it feels like nothing is happening. Because over time, those small choices accumulate. They build momentum, they create a new pattern, a new rhythm, a new way of living, and eventually you look back and realize that you are no longer the same person you once were, not because of one moment, but because of many. And this is the truth few talk about. The life you want is built in the moments no one sees. It is built in the quiet decisions, the hidden choices, the daily rhythms that shape your inner world. It is built when you choose truth over comfort, discipline over impulse, alignment over distraction. And once you begin to live this way, you realize that transformation is not something distant. It is something that is happening right now in the way you choose to live today. And from this point forward, your Christian life is no longer something you visit occasionally. It becomes the foundation of how you live, how you think, how you move through the world. And everything begins to change because you are no longer waiting for transformation, you are walking in it. At a certain point in your journey, something even deeper begins to unfold. Something that goes beyond awareness, beyond discipline, beyond even consistency. You begin to realize that the greatest obstacle you have been facing is not just your habits, not just your environment, not even your flesh in the way you once understood it. The deepest obstacle has been your identity. Not who you think you are on the surface, but who you believe yourself to be at the core. Because whether you realize it or not, every decision you make flows from identity. Every action, every reaction, every pattern in your life is rooted in what you believe about yourself. And this is where many believers remain stuck for years without understanding why. They try to change their behavior without addressing their identity. They try to live differently while still seeing themselves the same way they always have. And this creates a hidden conflict, because you cannot consistently live in a way that contradicts what you believe you are. You may try for a while, you may push yourself, you may even succeed temporarily, but eventually you will drift back to what feels familiar, what feels true to your internal identity. And this is why some people keep returning to the same struggles, even after seasons of growth. Not because they lack discipline, but because their identity has not fully shifted. Deep down, they still see themselves as someone who struggles, someone who fails, someone who is not fully free. And as long as that belief remains, their life will continue to reflect it. But here is the truth that changes everything. In Christ, you are not becoming a new person. You have already been made new. The transformation you are seeking is not about creating something that does not exist. It is about stepping into something that is already true. And this is where the shift becomes both powerful and challenging, because it requires you to let go of the identity you have carried for so long. The identity shaped by your past, your mistakes, your fears, your experiences. The identity that tells you who you are based on what you have done or what has been done to you. And letting go of that identity is not easy, because even if it has caused you pain, it is familiar, it is comfortable in a strange way, it is what you have known. And stepping into a new identity requires faith, not just belief in God, but belief in what He says about you. It requires you to trust that His truth is greater than your feelings, greater than your past, greater than your internal narrative. And this is where the battle becomes more subtle, because now it is not just about external choices, it is about internal agreement. It is about what you choose to believe when your mind tells you something different. When your emotions pull you in another direction, when your past tries to define your present, because the truth is, your mind has been shaped over years, sometimes decades, by patterns of thinking that do not align with who you are in Christ. And those patterns do not disappear overnight. They resist change. They try to pull you back into old ways of seeing yourself. And this is where many people become discouraged. They expect that once they understand their identity, everything will immediately feel different. But instead, they find themselves in a tension between what they know to be true and what they feel to be real. And this tension can feel confusing, but it is actually part of the process, because transformation of identity happens through renewal of the mind. Not just a one-time realization, but a continual process of realignment. It is the daily choice to reject the old narrative and embrace the truth, even when it does not feel natural yet. Even when it feels unfamiliar, even when it feels like you are stepping into something that is not fully yours. Because over time, what once felt unfamiliar begins to feel natural. What once felt like effort begins to feel like identity. And slowly, the internal conflict begins to fade. Not because the old thoughts disappear completely, but because they lose their authority. They no longer define you. They no longer control you. They become something you can observe, recognize, and choose not to agree with. And this is where true freedom begins, not when the battle disappears, but when it no longer has power over your identity. Because you begin to live from truth, not from emotion, from conviction, not from reaction, from identity, not from circumstance. And this changes everything. The way you handle temptation changes, because you are no longer fighting to become someone. You are standing as someone. The way you respond to failure changes, because you no longer see it as a reflection of who you are, but as a moment that does not define you. The way you approach God changes, because you are no longer coming from a place of trying to earn His presence. You are living from the reality that you are already accepted, already loved, already known. And this creates a new kind of stability in your life, not a fragile stability based on performance, but a deep-rooted stability based on identity. And from this place, your actions begin to flow differently, not out of pressure, not out of fear, but out of alignment. You begin to live in a way that reflects who you are, not who you are trying to become. And this is where many people finally experience the shift they have been searching for. Because they are no longer striving to change, they are allowing themselves to live from what is already true. And this does not mean the journey ends here. There are still challenges. There are still moments of struggle. But the foundation is different now. You are no longer building on unstable ground. You are rooted in something deeper, something unshakable. And this is the truth few talk about. The most powerful change in your Christian life does not come from changing what you do. It comes from changing who you believe you are. Because once your identity shifts, everything else begins to align. Your thoughts, your actions, your desires, your direction, they all begin to move in harmony with that identity. And this is where your life takes on a new clarity, a new purpose, a new depth. Because you are no longer living in confusion, you are living in alignment. And from this place, the path forward becomes clearer, not because every step is easy, but because you now know who you are as you walk it. And then, after everything begins to align, your awareness, your habits, your identity, there comes the final shift. The one that truly changes everything in a way that cannot be reversed. It is the moment when your relationship with God moves from something you visit to something you live in. Because up to this point, even as you have grown, even as you have understood deeper truths, there may still have been a subtle separation in your mind, a sense that God is there and you are here, that you approach Him at certain times, in certain moments, in certain conditions, that you connect during prayer, during worship, during reading, but then return to your normal life afterward. But what if that separation was never meant to exist? What if the Christian life was never meant to be a series of moments with God, but a continuous awareness of His presence in every moment? This is where everything changes in the deepest way possible, because you begin to realize that God is not someone you come to. He is someone you are already with, not occasionally, not conditionally, but constantly. And this is not just a comforting idea. It is a reality that reshapes how you live, how you think, how you move through your day. Because once you begin to live with this awareness, everything becomes different. The ordinary becomes meaningful. The routine becomes sacred. The quiet moments are no longer empty. They are filled with presence. And suddenly, your life is no longer divided into spiritual and non-spiritual moments. Everything becomes spiritual because everything is lived in relationship, and this is what many people have been missing. Not more effort, not more knowledge, but more awareness of what is already true. Because the presence of God is not something you earn, it is something you awaken to. And the more aware you become, the more you begin to live differently, not because you are forcing change, but because you are responding to presence. You begin to notice the subtle ways God leads you, not always through loud, dramatic signs, but through quiet impressions, through gentle convictions, through a deep sense of knowing that guides your decisions. And the more you pay attention, the clearer it becomes. Because God is always speaking, but not always in the ways you expect. And this is where many people miss it. They are waiting for something obvious, something undeniable, something external, while ignoring the internal movement of the Spirit within them. But when you slow down, when you become still, when you begin to live with awareness, you start to recognize His voice, not as something distant, but as something familiar. And this is where your relationship with God becomes real in a way that goes beyond religion, beyond routine, beyond structure. It becomes personal, alive, continuous. And from this place, obedience changes completely. It is no longer about following rules or trying to avoid failure. It becomes a natural response to relationship. Because when you are aware of His presence, when you are connected to Him in a real way, you begin to desire what aligns with Him, not out of obligation, but out of alignment. And this is where the struggle begins to lose its weight. Not because temptation disappears, but because your focus shifts. You are no longer fixated on what you are trying to avoid. You are focused on who you are walking with. And this changes your perspective. Because where your attention goes, your life follows. And when your attention is anchored in God's presence, the pull of the flesh begins to weaken, not instantly, not completely, but steadily, consistently. And over time, the things that once felt powerful begin to lose their influence, because they can no longer compete with something greater. And this is where peace begins to take root, not as a temporary feeling, but as a steady reality. A quiet confidence that does not depend on circumstances. A sense of stability that remains even when life feels uncertain. And this peace is not something you create. It is something that flows from presence, from connection, from the awareness that you are not walking alone. And this is where fear begins to lose its grip. Because fear thrives in separation, in the belief that you are on your own, that everything depends on you, that you must control outcomes to feel safe. But when you live with the awareness of God's presence, that illusion begins to fade. You realize that you are not carrying your life alone, that you are being led, guided, sustained in ways you may not fully understand, but can deeply trust. And this trust changes how you move through uncertainty. It changes how you handle challenges. It changes how you respond to situations that once overwhelmed you. Because now you are not reacting from fear. You are responding from presence. And this is where your life begins to reflect something different, not just externally, but internally. A calmness, a clarity, a depth that cannot be manufactured. And people may not be able to explain it, but they will notice it. Because there is something different about someone who lives with this kind of awareness. Something grounded, something steady, something real. And this is not about becoming perfect. It is not about reaching a point where you no longer struggle or face difficulty. It is about living from a place where those struggles no longer define you, where difficulty no longer destabilizes you, where your foundation is not shaken by what happens around you, because your life is no longer built on circumstances, it is built on presence. And this is the truth that changes everything. The Christian life is not about reaching God. It is about realizing that you are already with Him. It is not about striving to become spiritual. It is about living from the Spirit that is already within you. It's not about chasing transformation. It is about awakening to it moment by moment, day by day. And once you see this, once you truly understand it, you cannot go back to the old way of living. You cannot return to a life of separation, of striving, of surface-level faith, because now you know what is possible. You have tasted something deeper, something real, something that goes beyond everything you thought Christianity was. And from this point forward, your life becomes a journey, not of trying to find God, but of walking with Him, continuously, intentionally, in every moment. And that is what changes your Christian life forever.